Hey everyone, it's Lindsay, and I'm here today as a guest designer for Inspired by Stamping. I'm going to be sharing with you several cards, and on them I'm going to be doing some plaid stamping. For today's cards, I'm going to be using two stamp sets from Inspired by Stamping. The first one on the left is the Background Basic Lines, and you can see this is a well-loved stamp set, and I've only had it for about a month, but it is dyed from my black ink, so that's how you know it's a high-quality stamp. And the other one is the sentiment set, and that is going to be my sentiment set that I use for these cards. Now, for all of my stamping, I'm going to be stamping with some fun foam underneath. I'm also going to go ahead and have a white sheet behind me just to catch all the extra ink. And I'm going to be using this large block to stamp with, and I'll put it catty corner on the block so it will fit on there. Now I'm only going to show you how I do the beginning of the card one time because all the cards are going to be put together the same exact way. So I just take my T-square ruler, I use my pencil to draw a straight line about 1.5 inches to 2 inches from the top, and these are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white cardstock panels. And then I just tape on a little mask above that line, and anything below is going to be where my plaid stamping is. So I am starting out with the thickest stripe in the set, the thickest solid stripe in the set, and I am inking this up with some blue cards or some blue dye ink. Now I stamped it off one time onto a scrap piece of paper just to make sure it's stamping well. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on and start the stamping. Now I'm going to be doing this one straight up and down, and I'll just stamp it off onto the left hand side. I don't want it centered because then the whole thing will look very fake almost. So you want it a little off center, both the first vertical and horizontal lines. I'm going to move on to some rosebud ink. This is from Memento. These are all dye inks that I'm using, and I want to use dye inks so they blend a little bit in between colors, and that's just going to help pull off this whole plaid look. So dye inks are a major factor in this. Also, when I'm inking up these stamps, because they are such long solid stamps, I'm first swiping my ink pad across the stamp, and then I come back in and pat away any of those swiping lines. But doing that swipe at the beginning reassures me that I'm getting ink on all parts of the stamp. So once I had that pink smaller line down, I'm going to go ahead and move on to this stamp that has 4 lines that are very small on it. And I'll just go ahead and stamp this in some purple ink. Now I had my blue line first, and then I went on to the pink line, and I stamped on both sides of the blue, vertical and horizontal. So I stamped 4 pink lines, and I will do the same thing with the purple stamp as well. So I'm stamping on both sides of the pink, vertical and horizontal, and I'm using that same swipe and then patting motion to ink up my stamp. Now you could do this one of two ways. You could start over with your pattern, or you could do like me and work back to your starting color. So I'm going to work back, so I'm going back to that pink ink and that same stamp that I used before. I'm inking it up again, and I'll stamp it on both sides of the purple line. So I'll stamp on the right and left, and also the top and bottom of the lines. Now because I did not start in the very center, you're going to run out of room on the left and the bottom before you run out of room on the right and the top. And that again gives this more of an authentic feel rather than a very fake feel, I guess you could say. So now I'm going to go ahead and move back onto my blue ink, and the only place I have room is on the left hand side, and also on the top I need to go ahead and partial stamp that. It is going to get cut off a little bit by that masking tape. However, that's going to again help with the more authentic feel of the plaid. And once I've done all the stamping, I can remove that mask, and there I have the bottom 3/4 of my card that is a plaid feel to it, a plaid stamped pattern, and it is just so gorgeous. And this is really a lot of fun to play around with the colors. I'm also going to show you, you can change this up and stamp these at an angle. So here I'm starting out with the blue ink again, and I'm going to stamp this from the bottom right corner to the top left corner. And then I'll go ahead and flip this around and stamp it from the left to the right now. But when I make sure these lines intersect, I want to make sure that it's at a 90-degree angle. So you see from the two lines, I've got a 90-degree angle from the two, and that's going to help with the placement of the rest of the stamps. Now I'm moving on to the middle stripe in the set, and this is, I'm going to stamp in orange. Again, I'm using that same sweep then pat motion with my ink pad, and I'll stamp on both the right and left sides of both stamps that I've stamped in blue. I'm also putting a little bit more space between these than my other two stamps, and that's a way you can get a little variety also. You can make your lines closer together, you can space them out a little further, form a more white space in between, and that almost gives you a whole nother stripe. So I'm going to move on to the smallest stripe in the set, and a little trick here is if you have those stamps that you can't get perfectly straight on your block, use your ruler to help you out there and just push that up against the stamp until it's straight. Leave it there, mount it onto your acrylic block, and then you know that your stamp is nice and straight on your block. So I'm moving on to some gray ink. This is London Fog from Memento, and I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that on both sides of the orange, or on the right side of that orange stamp on the right side and the left side of the orange line on the left hand side. And then I'll do the same exact thing on the ones that are facing the opposite way, or that are angled the opposite way. And once I have those gray lines down, I'm going to go ahead and move back to my orange stripe and work back to my blue stripe. So I'm just going in opposite order now. And if you haven't noticed, I did speed this video up quite a bit just because there are so many cards and patterns I want to go through, so it is a little bit sped up and it won't bore you as much this way as well. So I'm working back through for my orange now, and I will run out of room on two of the sides, and I'll still have to continue stamping on two more of the sides. However, again, that's just going to help with the more authentic feel of a true plaid pattern. So I'll go ahead and work my way through this orange, and then I can move back to my very thick blue stripe. And you can see my thickest stripe is the one I have the least amount of on my actual card, just so the color doesn't overtake the entire pattern. I'll go ahead and stamp this one right here. I only have 3 sides left with any space on the card, so I only need to stamp it 3 times, and you only need to ink up the portion of the stamp you need. You can see some of my lines are fairly short there, so I only need to ink up a small amount of the stamp. So I want to move on to some softer colors, and instead of 3 colors, I'm going to go ahead and use 4 colors on this card. This is more of a very soft baby tone card, and that's what I'll end up using this for. And instead of cutting off at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and move that very first line I stamped up to the top. So I'm starting on the left hand side and the top with my 2 pink lines. Then I'm moving on to my green ink, and I'm just going to stamp on the right hand side and the bottom at this point. So I'm going to continue my pattern instead of working back through it, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. I've worked through my pink, my green, my blue, and my purple, and then I'm going to go ahead and use that same purple ink because I'm starting over with my pattern. I know it needs to be in front of the pink, so while I have it on my block and I have my ink out, I can go ahead and stamp it on the left hand side of the pink stripe and also on top of that pink stripe that I stamped first. And then I can work back through my pattern this way instead of I'm starting over with my pattern instead of working back through. So I'll start with pink again, and this is the thinnest stripe in the set. I came back in with my green as well, and now I'll work with my last one, and that is my blue color. So I just work back through. I can peel off this mask, and I've got a gorgeous different sort of pattern ready to go for that card base. Now on this one, again, I worked through my colors, and now I'm working back with that blue, and because this is such a thick stamp, this will be the last stamp I need. So I worked through all the colors, and then I just need that final blue, and that does it for that pattern. I also came in and I did a few more different patterns. It gets kind of addicting to see what kind of patterns you can come up with and just different color combinations. It really is a lot of fun. This one I went with more of a fall theme, and I spaced my lines out a bit more. So you can see there's a lot more white showing through on this one. I also angled these, and I didn't use a whole lot of this red because it's such a thick stripe to begin with. I really didn't want it to overtake the card, so I worked back through my pattern instead of starting over with this red. And then you can see I'm just inking up the parts of the stamps I need instead of the whole thing, and that will speed up your process as well. For this last one, I wanted to go ahead and do a teacher theme card, so I used some reds, greens, and a really dark, almost black gray. And then it was time to start putting these cards together. I stopped at 6, but to put these together, I just cut little strips of coordinating cardstock. So here you can see I have a gray that goes with that gray stripe. And I cut these a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch, attach some double-sided adhesive to the back. I'll peel off that backing paper, stick those down right over that mask line just to clean that up. And then I can trim off the sides with some long blade scissors. For the sentiments on these cards, I'm using the Sending You stamp set from Inspired by Stamping, and I am going to just use different inks that coordinate with one of the colors in the pattern below it, and I'm just going to mix and match these. So I have Sending a Note of Thanks on this card, and I'm just going to switch it up with each one of the different cards. Now to put these together, I did this line style. So I'm just putting some double-sided adhesive on the back of each one of the panels. I will peel it off, and then I'm just placing this on top of an A2 top folding card base to keep these nice and flat. Now the great thing about this is because they are all plaid and I'm using the same sentiment set, you could give this as a gift of note cards to someone. So it switches it up a little bit, but it also allows a nice flow of pattern to give as a coordinating gift. Now for the baby card, I put Sending You a Little Something. I thought that went really well with the baby card. With the autumn card, I used Sending You My Gratitude, since that is more the Thanksgiving style. Then for these more boyish patterns, I wanted to really keep these as birthday cards. I go through boy birthday cards like you wouldn't have it. So I kept Sending You Birthday Wishes on both of these two right here with the more boy colors in them. And then once I have that placed down, I'll move on to my final one, which is my teacher card, and I needed a thanks card for my son's teacher. So I put Sending a Note of Thanks on this one, but you could always switch that up to whatever kind of card you might need. Now here I will give you one last look at all of these sentiments and all of these patterns. This really was a lot of fun to come up with different patterns and color combinations for each one of these cards, and it really gave me a nice way to end up with a lot of cards without a lot of effort. So this was a very quick way to get a nice set of cards ready to be sent out. I hope you all enjoyed this video today, and I hope you too will try some plaid stamping. If you're interested in either one of the Inspired by Stamping sets that I used on today's cards, they are both linked in the description box below, as well as the Inspired by Stamping blog. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!